He was wearing a $3,000 suit, but his attitude was cheap. When Preston van der Hoeven boarded Flight 882 to London, he thought his last name was a golden ticket to behave like a king. He looked at the man in seat 1A, a black man in a hoodie, quietly reading a tablet, and decided that this was a mistake. He demanded the man be moved. He screamed, he threatened, but he didn't know two things. First, the man in the hoodie wasn't just a passenger. He was Damien Sterling, the CEO who had just saved the airline from bankruptcy. And second, Captain O'Connor wasn't flying anywhere until the trash was taken out. This is the story of the flight that never left the ground until justice was served cold. The blizzard outside John F. Kennedy International Airport was historic. It was December 31st, 5:45 p.m. The tarmac was a sheet of white glass, and the de-icing trucks were working overtime, looking like strange orange beetles crawling over the wings of the massive Boeing 777. Inside the cabin of first class, however, the air was still, scented with expensive leather and the faint aroma of pre-flight champagne. Damien Sterling shifted in seat 1A, adjusting the noise-cancelling headphones over his ears. He was exhausted. At 42, Damien didn't look like the typical titan of industry. He wasn't wearing a bespoke Savile Row suit or a Patek Philippe watch. He was dressed in a charcoal cashmere hoodie, black joggers, and a pair of worn-in sneakers. To the untrained eye, he looked like a tech support guy, or maybe a tired graduate student. But the tech he supported was a global logistics AI infrastructure that currently powered 40% of the Western world's shipping routes. He had spent the last 72 hours in a windowless boardroom in Manhattan negotiating a merger that would save Atlantic Meridian Airlines from a hostile takeover. The deal was signed an hour ago. Technically, as of 4:00 p.m. today, Damien owned a controlling interest in the very plane he was sitting on. But he hadn't told a soul, not the flight attendants, not the gate agents. He just wanted to sleep. "Champagne, Mr. Sterling?" Damien looked up. The flight attendant, a young woman named Sophia, with a kind face but tired eyes, was holding a crystal flute. "Just water, please, Sophia. And maybe a black coffee if we're delayed." "We're doing our best to beat the snow, sir," she smiled, placing a bottle of Evian on his coaster. "Door closes in 10 minutes. Damien nodded and turned back to his tablet. He was reading a book on architectural history, his one hobby outside of coding. He closed his eyes for a second, letting the hum of the auxiliary power unit lull him. Then, the peace shattered. A commotion at the front of the plane caused Damien to open one eye. A man was standing in the galley, arguing with the purser. The man was tall, silver-haired, and wearing a camel-hair coat that probably cost more than a mid-sized sedan. He carried a leather briefcase with gold initials, PVH. This was Preston van der Hoeven. If you read the financial tabloids, you knew the name. The van der Hoevens were old money, steel and shipping money from the 1920s. Preston was the current patriarch of the family trust. He was known for two things: his aggressive real estate acquisitions in London and his temper. "I don't care what the computer says," Preston barked, his voice cutting through the hushed cabin. "I specifically had my assistant book 1A. I always sit in 1A. It's the bulkhead. I need the legroom for my knee." Mr. van der Hoeven, the purser, a stoic man named Dylan, replied calmly. "We show you in 2A. It's the exact same seat, directly behind—" "I don't want to sit behind anyone," Preston snapped, pushing past Dylan. He marched into the first-class cabin, his eyes scanning the pods. He stopped dead when he saw Damien. Damien felt the man's presence before he saw him. He took off his headphones and looked up. Preston was staring down at him with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. It wasn't just annoyance, it was a look of violation. as if Damien's mere existence in that seat was an insult to the leather. "You," Preston said, pointing a manicured finger at Damien. "You're in my seat." Damien blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Preston sneered, his British accent clipped and icy. "You are in seat 1A. That is my seat. I fly this route once a month, and I always sit there. Get up." Damien looked at Sophia, who had rushed over, looking mortified. "Sir," Sophia said, stepping between them, "Mr. Sterling is assigned to this seat. You are in 2A. Please let me take your coat and show you to your—" "I am not sitting in 2A," Preston roared, causing several other passengers to look up. A famous actress in 3F lowered her sunglasses. A hedge fund manager in 4A paused his call. Preston leaned over Damien's pod, invading his personal space. The smell of expensive scotch on his breath was overpowering. "Look, pal, I don't know how you got upgraded. Maybe it's an employee perk. Maybe you used miles. But this is first class. People pay $20,000 for these seats. I actually paid for mine. So be a good lad, grab your little backpack, and go back to economy, where there's plenty of space for your type." The cabin went deadly silent. The snow lashed against the windows, but the chill inside the plane was far colder. Damien stared at Preston. He didn't blink. He didn't get angry. He just looked at the man with a terrifying calmness. "I paid for this seat, just like you," Damien said, his voice low and steady. "And I'm not moving." Preston laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You paid? Please. Look at you. You look like you're here to fix the Wi-Fi. Now move, or I'll have security drag you off." The tension in the cabin was thick enough to choke on. Sophia, the flight attendant, was trembling slightly. She knew exactly who Preston van der Hoven was. He was a Diamond Medallion member, a frequent flyer who had famously caused a scene 3 years ago when his soup wasn't hot enough. But she also had a manifest that said Damien Sterling was a VIP, though the system didn't specify why. "Mr. van der Hoven," Sophia tried again, her voice shaking but firm. "Please take your assigned seat. We need to close the doors to make our slot for de-icing. If we miss it, we'll be stuck here for hours." Preston ignored her entirely. He kept his eyes locked on Damien. "I'm going to count to 3. If you aren't out of that seat, I'm making a phone call that will end your career, whatever pathetic career that might be." Damien sighed. He picked up his tablet again. "Go make your call." Preston's face turned a violent shade of red. He slammed his briefcase onto the empty seat across the aisle, seat 1K, startling the elderly woman sitting in 2K. "Right," Preston spat. He pulled out a gold-plated iPhone. "You want to play hardball? Fine. Let's see how smug you look when the airport police are escorting you off for theft of services." He dialed a number, putting it on speakerphone for the theatrical effect. The line rang twice before a voice answered. "Rylan, it's Preston." The voice on the other end sounded weary. "Preston, it's New Year's Eve. I'm at dinner with my family." "I don't care if you're at dinner with the Pope, Rylan," Preston yelled. "I'm on flight 882 to London. There is a squatter in my seat. Some hoodlum in a sweatshirt refuses to move. The crew is useless. I want him off. Now." The cabin listened intently. Rylan was presumably an executive at the airline. "Preston," Rylan sighed. "Who is in the seat?" "I don't know. Nobody. Some kid named Sterling. Get him off, Rylan, or I'm pulling the logistics contract for the Van der Hoven shipping containers. You know how much that account is worth to this airline?" Sophia's eyes went wide. The Van der Hoven shipping contract was massive. It accounted for a significant portion of the airline's cargo revenue. Losing it would be catastrophic. Damien, however, didn't flinch. He actually smiled. A very small, very dangerous smile. "Sterling?" Ryland's voice changed on the phone. "Did you say Damien Sterling?" "Yes, Sterling. Get rid of him." There was a long pause on the line. "Preston, put the flight attendant on. Now." Preston smirked, thrusting the phone at Sophia. "He wants to talk to you. You're probably fired, by the way." Sophia took the phone, her hands shaking. "Hello? This is Sophia Jenkins, senior flight attendant." "Sophia," Ryland's voice was urgent, "is the passenger in 1A Damien Sterling, African-American, late 30s, early 40s?" "Yes, sir." "Do not move him," Ryland commanded. "Under no circumstances are you to move him. Tell Preston to sit in 2A or get off the plane." Preston, hearing this, snatched the phone back. "What the hell are you talking about, Ryland? You're choosing a nobody over me, over Vander Hoven, money." "Preston, listen to me," Ryland hissed. "That nobody isn't just a passenger. Just sit down. I can't explain right now, but you are making a massive mistake." "The only mistake I made was flying this budget airline," Preston screamed. He ended the call and threw the phone onto the seat. He turned back to Damien, his face twisted in malice. Logic had failed. Authority had failed. Now he was just an angry man who had been told no for the first time in his life. "I see how it is," Preston hissed, leaning in so close that spittle landed on Damien's cheek. "Affirmative action at work, is it? They need a quota for first class. You think because you have a ticket you belong here? You don't. You're dirt. And I'm not flying in a metal tube with dirt sitting in front of me." Damien slowly wiped the spittle from his cheek. He folded his tablet cover. The silence in the cabin was deafening. "Are you finished?" Damien asked softly. "I'm finished when you're gone," Preston snarled. He reached out and grabbed the sleeve of Damien's hoodie, yanking it. "Get up!" That was the line. The sound of the fabric tearing was small, but the reaction was instant. Damien stood up. He wasn't as tall as Preston, but he was denser, built with the compact strength of someone who boxed to manage stress. He stood his ground, inches from Preston. "Don't touch me," Damien said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the air heavy. "Or what?" Preston challenged, puffing his chest out. "You'll assault me. Go ahead. Please, give me a reason to have you thrown in a cell tonight." At that moment, the cockpit door burst open. Captain Michael O'Connor stepped out. Captain O'Connor was 60 years old, with a white mustache and the posture of a man who had flown fighter jets in the Gulf War. He wore 4 gold stripes on his shoulders and a look of absolute zero tolerance on his face. He had been listening to the reports from the purser over the interphone, but the physical altercation had forced his hand. "What?" the captain boomed, his voice projecting all the way to row 10. "Is going on here?" Preston spun around, relieved. "Finally, someone with authority." "Captain, this passenger is aggressive. He's in my seat, and he just threatened me. I want him removed immediately." Captain O'Connor looked at Preston, then at Damien. He looked at the torn hoodie. He looked at Sophia, who was near tears. "He grabbed Mr. Sterling, Captain," Sophia said, her voice trembling but brave. "Mr. Vander Hoven initiated physical contact." "She's lying," Preston shouted. "She's covering for him. They're probably sleeping together." The captain's eyes narrowed into slits. He stepped fully into the cabin, closing the cockpit door behind him with a solid thud. "Mr. Vander Hoven," the captain said, his voice dropping an octave. "I am the commander of this aircraft. My word is law. And right now, my law says you need to lower your voice." "Don't you dare talk to me like that," Preston spat, his face purple. "Do you know how much cargo I ship with this airline? I pay your salary, you glorified bus driver. Now, get this." He gestured vaguely at Damien. "Thing off my flight. or I will personally ensure you never fly anything bigger than a kite again." The captain stood still. He looked at the snow swirling outside the open galley door. He looked at his crew. Then he looked at Damien. Damien gave a slight nod, a look of respect between two men who understood power. Captain O'Connor turned back to Preston. He reached for the PA microphone on the wall. "Folks," the captain said, his voice calm over the speakers. "This is the captain. We have a security situation in the first-class cabin. I'm going to have to ask everyone to remain seated." He clicked the mic off and looked Preston dead in the eye. "Mr. van der Hoeven, you have two choices. Choice A. You take seat 2A, you shut your mouth, and you don't say another word until we land in London. Choice B." The captain smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Choice B is, I turn this plane around, return to the gate, and have the Port Authority arrest you for interfering with a flight crew and assault. And trust me, New York cops on New Year's Eve are not known for their patience." Preston stared at him, his mouth agape. He couldn't believe it. The world had gone mad. A captain threatening him? Preston straightened his coat. He smoothed his hair. He looked at Damien with a look of pure venom. "Fine," Preston whispered. "I'll sit. But mark my words. When we land, you're all finished." He stepped back and threw himself into seat 2A, kicking the back of Damien's seat hard. The captain watched him for a moment longer, then nodded to Sophia. "Close the door. Let's go." It seemed like the drama was over. The passengers exhaled. Damien sat back down. But as the plane began to push back from the gate, the snowstorm outside intensified, and inside seat 2A, Preston van der Hoeven was not done. He was pulling out his laptop, and he was typing an email to the board of directors of Atlantic Meridian Airlines. He typed the subject line, "Immediate termination of Captain O'Connor and crew." He hit send. He had no idea that the man sitting in front of him, the man he had just called Dirt, received a notification on his watch instantly. Damien looked at his wrist. He read the subject line. Subject, immediate termination. Damien didn't get angry. He just tapped his screen, forwarding the email to his own legal team with a simple note. "Wait for my signal." The plane taxied toward the runway, the engines roaring to life. But they would never make it to the sky. Not tonight. The Boeing 727 didn't move. It sat on the tarmac, a metal whale beached in a sea of white. The blizzard had intensified, turning the world outside the portholes into a swirling grey void. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, sounding weary. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've missed our initial de-icing slot due to the earlier delay. We are currently number 14 in line. We're looking at a hold time of approximately 90 minutes before we can get airborne. We apologize for the inconvenience." A collective groan rippled through the plane. But in the first-class cabin, the groan was silenced by the sharp sound of a boot hitting plastic. Thump. Preston van der Hoeven was kicking the back of Damien's seat. It wasn't an accident. It was a rhythmic, deliberate act of psychological warfare. Thump. Damien tried to focus on his tablet. He was reviewing the vesting schedules for the airline's pilot pension fund, a fund he planned to top up as his first act as owner. But the vibration against his spine was making it impossible to concentrate. "Sophia!" Preston shouted, not bothering to use the call button. "Sophia, I'm thirsty. Bring me a scotch. Neat. Make it a double. I need to wash away the taste of bad company." Sophia appeared from the galley, looking frazzled. We are technically on an active taxiway. I can't serve alcohol until we are in the air. It's FAA regulation." "Regulations," Preston scoffed, loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. Regulations are for poor people, Sophia. I'm Preston van der Hoven. My taxes paid for this runway. Bring me the bottle, or I'll add your name to the termination email I just sent." "Sir, please lower your voice," Sophia whispered, glancing nervously at the other passengers. The hedge fund manager in 4A was now openly recording the scene on his phone. "Don't tell me what to do," Preston snapped. He leaned forward, putting his face near the gap between the seats. "Hey, you. Sterling. Or whatever your name is." Damien didn't turn around. Thump. Preston kicked the seat harder. "I'm talking to you, boy. This is your fault. We're sitting here because you couldn't just follow the natural order of things. If you had just moved your cheap ass to row 30, we'd be halfway to London by now." Damien slowly took off his headphones. He turned his head slightly. "We're sitting here because you missed the slot, Preston. You're the delay. You're the problem." "I'm the problem?" Preston laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "I'm the victim. I'm the one being forced to stare at the back of a hoodie in a premium cabin. I bet you don't even have a job. What do you do? Drug dealer? Rapper? Did you win a lottery ticket?" The racism was no longer veiled. It was out in the open, ugly and raw. The elderly woman in 2K gasped audibly. "Mr. van der Hoven, that is enough!" The purser, Dylan, stepped in, his face stern. "It's not enough until he's gone." Preston unbuckled his seatbelt. The seatbelt sign was on. He stood up in the aisle, looming over Damien's pod. "Sit down, sir," Dylan commanded. "No," Preston yelled. "I want everyone to know. This man is a fraud. He's a security risk. Look at him. He's probably got a weapon in that bag." Preston lunged. He wasn't going for Damien. He was going for Damien's backpack, which was tucked under the footrest. Damien moved with lightning speed. He unbuckled and stood up, blocking Preston's path with his body. He didn't raise his hands, but his stance was a stone wall. "Don't touch my property," Damien said. His voice was dropped to a whisper, terrifyingly calm. "Last warning." Preston sneered. "Or what? You'll hit me? Do it. Come on. Show everyone who you really are." Preston shoved Damien. It was a hard shove to the chest. Damien stumbled back a step but caught his balance. He looked at Preston, then at the camera phone in 4A, then at Sophia. He held his hands up, palms open. "I am not engaging. Coward!" Preston screamed. He grabbed a glass of water from the center console, Sophia's water, and splashed it. The water hit Damien full in the face. It soaked his hoodie, dripping down his nose and chin. The cabin erupted. Passengers were shouting. The actress in 3F was screaming for help. Damien stood there, water dripping from his eyelashes. He didn't wipe it off. He just stared at Preston, his dark eyes analyzing, calculating, recording the moment in his memory forever. "That," Damien said softly, "was a very expensive glass of water." The intercom chimed. It wasn't the calm announcement tone. It was the triple chime of an emergency alert. "Cabin crew, take your seats immediately," Captain O'Connor's voice barked. The plane lurched. It wasn't moving forward. It was turning. A sharp, aggressive turn that threw Preston off balance. He fell back into his seat. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. Due to a security threat in the first-class cabin, I am declaring an emergency. We are returning to the gate. Law enforcement has been notified." Preston scrambled to sit up, wiping his coat. He looked furious, but also triumphant. "Finally," Preston shouted to the cabin. The captain came to his senses. "We're going back to drop off the trash." He looked at Damien, who was calmly drying his face with a napkin Sophia had handed him. "Enjoy jail, kid." Preston smirked. "I hope you like roommates." The return to the gate took 20 agonizing minutes. The atmosphere inside the plane was toxic. The passengers in economy, who had no idea what was happening, were groaning and complaining about the delay. In first class, the silence was heavy. broken only by Preston's muttering as he typed furiously on his phone. When the seatbelt sign pinged off, the jet bridge began to move toward the door. Preston stood up immediately, smoothing his coat, fixing his tie. He put on his innocent, executive face. The cabin door opened. A blast of freezing air hit the cabin, followed by 3 officers from the Port Authority Police Department. They were big men, dressed in heavy tactical gear, snow melting on their shoulders. "Who is the problem?" the lead officer asked. His name tag read SGT. "Miller." Preston stepped forward before the crew could speak. "Officer, thank God," Preston said, extending a hand. "I'm Preston Vanderhoven. I'm the one who called. That man there." He pointed a shaking finger at Damien. "Assaulted me. He's been threatening passengers, he's drunk, and he refused to follow crew instructions." Sergeant Miller looked at Preston. He recognized the name, or at least he recognized the type. Expensive coat, authoritative voice, the kind of guy who golfs with the mayor. Then Miller looked at Damien. Damien was wet. He was wearing a hoodie. He was standing quietly with his hands visible. To a tired cop on New Year's Eve, the narrative seemed easy to read. The rich guy was the victim. The guy in the hoodie was the trouble. "Sir," Miller said to Damien, stepping past Preston. "Grab your bags. You're coming with us." "Officer," Sophia interjected, stepping forward. "That is not what happened. Mr. Vanderhoven initiated the conflict. He threw water on—" "I'll take statements outside." Miller cut her off. "Right now, I need to de-escalate. The captain wants the problem removed. Let's go." "I am not the problem," Damien said. His voice was level. "I have been assaulted. I have witnesses." "I said let's go," Miller said, his hand resting near his belt. "Don't make me use cuffs." Preston smirked behind the officer's back. He mouthed the words, "Bye-bye" to Damien. It was the moment where injustice usually wins, the moment where the money talks and the truth walks. But then, a shadow fell over the group. Captain O'Connor had emerged from the cockpit. He had his cap on, he had his flight jacket zipped up, and he was carrying his flight bag. "Officer Miller," the captain said. Miller turned. "Captain, we're removing the passenger so you can get underway." "No," Captain O'Connor said. He walked past the officers and stood next to Damien. He placed a hand on Damien's shoulder. "If you take Mr. Sterling off this plane," the captain said, his voice ringing through the silent cabin, "then you better take me too, because I'm not flying this plane with that man." He pointed at Preston. "On board." Preston's jaw dropped. "Excuse me? You're the pilot. You have to fly. It's your job." "My job is the safety of my passengers and crew," O'Connor replied. "You have verbally abused my flight attendants. You have physically assaulted a passenger. You have created a hostile environment. I am refusing to fly you. Period." Miller looked confused. "Captain, are you saying you want Mr. Vanderhoven removed?" "I'm saying," O'Connor clarified, "that either Mr. Vanderhoven gets off or this plane stays at the gate until the snow melts in April." Preston laughed. It was a desperate, angry sound. "You're bluffing. You're a union worker. You can't just decide not to fly. I'll sue you. I'll sue this entire airline." He pulled out his phone again. "I'm calling Rylan, right now. You're fired, O'Connor. You're done." "Call him," Damien said. Everyone looked at Damien. He hadn't spoken in a while. "Call Rylan," Damien repeated. "Put him on speaker." "Oh, you want to hear me fire your boyfriend?" Preston sneered. "Gladly." He dialed. The phone rang. It picked up instantly. "Preston," Rylan's voice came through, sounding panicked. "Where are you? I'm getting alerts that the flight returned to gate." "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Preston yelled. "The captain has gone rogue. He's siding with the squatter. I want you to fire Captain O'Connor immediately, Rylan. Authorize it now, or I pull the contracts." There was a silence on the phone, a long, heavy silence. "Rylan," Preston demanded. "Preston," Rylan's voice was trembling. "Is Damien Sterling there? Can he hear me?" "Yes, he's standing right here looking like a wet dog," Preston spat. "Mr. Sterling?" Rylan asked. Damien stepped closer to the phone. "I'm here, Rylan." "Mr. Sterling, I am so sorry," Rylan stammered. "I tried to tell Preston. I didn't know he would." "Rylan, shut up!" Preston screamed. "Why are you apologizing to him? Who the hell is he?" Damien reached out and took the phone from Preston's hand. Preston was so shocked he didn't even resist. Damien held the phone up. He looked at the passengers. He looked at the police. He looked at Captain O'Connor. "Rylan," Damien said into the phone. "What is the exact time?" It's 7:15 p.m., sir," Rylan replied. "Good," Damien said. "So the paperwork is cleared." Damien hung up the phone. He handed it back to Preston. Then Damien unzipped his wet hoodie. Underneath, he was wearing a simple black t-shirt. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a thin, metal ID card. It wasn't a passenger ID. It was a black card with a silver chip. He held it up for the police officers to see. "Officer Miller," Damien said. "My name is Damien Sterling. I am the founder of Sterling Logistics. And as of 4:10 p.m. this afternoon, I am the majority shareholder and new chairman of the board of Atlantic Meridian Airlines." A gasp went through the cabin. It started in row 4 and swept forward. Preston stared at him. His face went pale. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You bought the airline?" Preston whispered. "I bought the airline," Damien confirmed. "I was flying commercial to see how my employees are treated. I wanted to see the culture firsthand." Damien turned to Captain O'Connor. "Captain, thank you for standing up for what's right. You demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership I want in this company." Then Damien turned his cold eyes back to Preston. "Mr. van der Hoven, you demanded to speak to the owner. You're looking at him." The silence that followed Damien's reveal was absolute. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. Officer Miller looked at the ID card, then at Preston, then back at Damien. His posture shifted immediately. He took his hand off his belt. "Mr. Sterling," Miller said, his tone respectful. I apologize. We were given false information." "You were," Damien nodded. "But now you have the truth." Preston was shaking. The color had drained from his face, leaving him looking grey and old. His arrogance, which had been his armor, was shattered. He realized the magnitude of his mistake. He hadn't just insulted a passenger. He had assaulted the man who owned the plane, the gate, and arguably the route. "Now look here," Preston stammered, trying to regain some footing. "Damien, Mr. Sterling, let's be reasonable. It was a misunderstanding. Stress of the holidays. The snow. I'm sure we can..." "We can what?" Damien interrupted. "Forget that you called me a racial slur? Forget that you assaulted me? Forget that you threatened my captain's livelihood?" Damien stepped closer. "You said something earlier, Preston. You said, 'Money talks.' You were right. But you forgot one thing. Character speaks louder." Damien turned to the station manager, a woman named Linda, who had just rushed down the jet bridge, looking breathless and terrified. "Linda, is it?" Damien asked. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Oh my God, sir. We had no idea you were..." "It's fine, Linda," Damien said calmly. "I have a few administrative changes I'd like to make, effective immediately." He pointed at Preston. "First, Mr. van der Hoven is to be removed from this aircraft. He is banned from Atlantic Meridian Airlines for life. Not just him, his entire family trust. Cancel his return tickets, void his miles, delete his status. Preston gasped. "You can't do that. I have 3 million miles." "You had 3 million miles," Damien corrected. "Now you have 0. Damien wasn't done. "Second, regarding the Van der Hoeven shipping contract. I believe it's up for renewal next month." Preston's eyes went wide. "Damien, please. That contract is my entire Q1 projection. You can't mix personal issues with business." "It's not personal," Damien said coldly. "It's strictly business. I don't do business with people who abuse my staff. The contract is terminated. My legal team will send over the breach of conduct clause in the morning." Preston looked like he was going to vomit. In 5 minutes, he had lost his flight, his status, and his family's biggest business deal. "Officer Miller," Damien said, "I'd like to press charges for assault. I have the video evidence from the passenger in 4A, and I have a cabin full of witnesses." "Understood, sir," Miller said. He turned to Preston. "Mr. Van der Hoeven, please stand up. Put your hands behind your back." "No, this is insane. Do you know who I am?" Preston shrieked as Miller grabbed his wrist. "Yeah," Miller said, clicking the handcuffs shut. "You're the guy who just lost everything. Let's go." Preston was dragged down the aisle. He was kicking and screaming, shouting threats, pleading, crying. As he passed Damien, he looked up with eyes full of tears. "Please," Preston begged. I'm sorry." Damien didn't look down. He was looking at Sophia. "Are you okay?" Damien asked her gentle. Sophia wiped a tear from her cheek and nodded. "I am now, sir." "Take a week off, Sophia. Paid. When you come back, you're not a flight attendant anymore. You're the new head of in-flight guest experience. I need someone who knows how to handle people like that to train our crews." Sophia covered her mouth, sobbing in relief. "Thank you, sir." Damien turned to the cabin. The passengers were staring at him in awe. "Ladies and gentlemen," Damien raised his voice, "I apologize for the delay. We're going to get you to London. And because of the trouble, everyone on this flight is receiving a full refund and a voucher for a future round-trip ticket anywhere we fly." The cabin erupted in cheers. People clapped. The hedge fund manager gave a thumbs up. Damien sat back down in seat 1A. The wet spot was still there, but he didn't care. Captain O'Connor returned to the cockpit. He picked up the PA mic. "Folks, this is the captain. The cargo has been offloaded. We've been cleared for immediate pushback. Next stop, London." The engines roared. The plane began to move. But the story wasn't quite over. Because karma had one last twist for Preston Van der Hoeven and a new beginning for Damien Sterling. While Flight 882 was cruising at 35,000 feet over the Atlantic, the world below was waking up to a digital hurricane. Preston Van der Hoeven sat in a holding cell at the JFK Port Authority precinct. The room was cinderblock grey, smelling of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. They had taken his shoelaces, his belt, and his tie. The camel hair coat was balled up on a metal bench, stained with the slush from the tarmac. He was pacing, waiting for his lawyer. He was furious, but he was also confident. In his mind, this was a temporary inconvenience. He would sue the police for false arrest. He would sue the airline. He would sue Damien Sterling. He was a Van der Hoeven, and Van der Hoevens didn't stay in cages. Finally, the heavy metal door buzzed open. His lawyer, a frantic-looking man named Mark, walked in. He didn't look like a man coming to save a client. He looked like a man coming to deliver a death sentence. "Get me out of here, Mark," Preston barked. "I want to be at the Ritz-Carlton by midnight, and I want the names of every officer involved in this farce." Mark didn't open his briefcase. He just stood there, clutching his tablet. "Preston," Mark said, his voice hollow, "we have a problem, a big problem. What problem? Just pay the bail. It's not the bail, Mark sighed. It's the internet. He turned the tablet around. The video was everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. The passenger in seat 4A, the hedge fund manager, had uploaded the entire confrontation in 4K resolution. The video was titled, "Racist Billionaire Throws Water on Black CEO, Instant Karma." It had 42 million views in 3 hours. Preston watched in horror. He saw himself screaming. He heard the slurs. He saw the moment he shoved Damien. He saw the water splash. And worst of all, he saw the comments scrolling by at light speed. "Find this guy and ruin him." "That's Preston van der Hoeven. His family owns VDH Shipping. Boycott." Imagine treating the owner of the airline like that. What a clown. "NVDH is trending #1 worldwide. This is taken out of context," Preston stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "There is no context, Preston," Mark said brutally. "CNN is running it on a loop. The BBC just did a segment on it. And 10 minutes ago, the board of directors of the Van der Hoeven Family Trust held an emergency meeting." Preston went cold. "They can't meet without me. I'm the chairman." "Not anymore," Mark said softly. "They voted unanimously to remove you, Preston. To save the stock price, they have to cut off the limb to save the body. You're out. You've been stripped of your voting rights and your salary." Preston sank onto the metal bench. The cold from the steel seeped into his bones. "But my trust fund, my dividends." "Frozen pending a conduct investigation," Mark replied. "And since Damien Sterling just cancelled the Atlantic Meridian contract, which constituted 40% of next year's revenue, the family is looking at a massive liquidity crisis. They are blaming you." Preston stared at the wall. The silence of the cell was deafening. Just 4 hours ago, he was a king demanding a seat. Now he was a pariah with no shoes, no job, and a family that wanted his head on a spike. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Flight 882 began its descent into London Heathrow. The mood on the plane was euphoric. Sophia and the crew had been serving the passengers with a renewed energy. Damien had spent the flight walking through the cabins, not just first class, but economy too, shaking hands and listening to passengers. He didn't act like a celebrity. He acted like a host. As they taxied to the gate, Captain O'Connor made one last announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London. The local time is 7:20 a.m. on New Year's Day. On behalf of myself, the crew, and our chairman, Mr. Sterling, I'd like to wish you a happy new year. And to the passenger in seat 1A, thanks for the upgrade." The cabin laughed. When the doors opened, it wasn't just the ground crew waiting. It was a sea of cameras. The story had crossed the ocean faster than the jet. Damien stepped off the plane, looking tired but sharp. He had changed back into a fresh shirt he had in his carry-on. Reporters shouted questions, flashes popping like fireworks. "Mr. Sterling, are you going to sue Van der Hoeven? Damien, is it true you bought the airline just to fire him? What do you have to say to people who face discrimination like this?" Damien stopped. He raised a hand, and the press quieted down. He beckoned for Sophia and Captain O'Connor to stand next to him. "I didn't buy the airline to fire anyone," Damien said, his voice calm and broadcast ready. "I bought it because I believe in connection. Aviation brings people together. But tonight, we saw what happens when people think their status makes them superior." He put a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "This crew is the real story. They stood up to abuse. They protected their passengers. And as long as I run this company, that is the standard we will hold. Racism and entitlement have no seat on my planes. They can walk." The clip of that speech would go on to be viewed more times than the moon landing. The calendar on the wall of the JFK terminal read June 30th. Exactly 6 months to the day since the blizzard that had frozen New York and set the internet on fire. The summer sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Terminal 4, illuminating a space that had been completely transformed. Under the new leadership of Damian Sterling, Atlantic Meridian Airlines wasn't just a carrier, it was a movement. The morale was palpable. Gate agents smiled because they were paid well. Pilots walked with their heads high because they were respected. The Sterling Standard had become a case study in business schools across the country. Damian Sterling stood near the window of the newly renovated departure lounge, sipping a bottle of water. He looked different than he had that winter night. He wasn't wearing a hoodie today. He was in a sharp, navy blue blazer over a crisp white t-shirt. He looked rested, but his eyes were still scanning, always analyzing the flow of his operation. He was flying to London again. This time, it wasn't to save the airline from bankruptcy. It was to accept the Global CEO of the Year award at a gala in Kensington. "Boarding will commence in 10 minutes, Mr. Sterling," said Dillon, the same purser from that fateful New Year's Eve flight. Dillon had been promoted to chief purser of the transatlantic fleet. "Thanks, Dillon. I'll board with Group 1. No special treatment," Damian said, flashing a warm smile. "Old habits die hard, boss." Dillon laughed and walked back to the desk. Damian turned to watch the passengers gathering at the gate. It was a full flight. Families going on vacation, business travelers tapping on laptops, students with backpacks. But then, Damian's eyes caught something, or someone, that didn't fit the picture of summer joy. Near the back of the line, standing away from the main group as if trying to blend into the drywall, was a man. He was wearing a suit, but it was tragic. The fabric was shiny with age at the elbows, the hem of the trousers was frayed, and it hung loosely on a frame that had lost at least 30 pounds. He was clutching a plastic grocery bag and a battered carry-on that looked like it had been dragged through a war zone. Damian squinted. He took a step closer to the glass partition. The man wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked terrified, his eyes darting around nervously, avoiding eye contact with anyone. It was Preston van der Hoeven. The fall of the House of van der Hoeven had been the financial story of the decade. After the video of his racist tirade went viral, the collapse was swift and brutal. The board of directors had not just fired him, they had sued him for breach of fiduciary duty to protect the family assets. His customized employment contracts were voided. His social circle, the Hamptons elites, the London bankers, had ghosted him overnight. He was toxic, unemployable, and thanks to a series of leveraged debts he had personally guaranteed, he was now effectively bankrupt. Karma hadn't just hit him, it had run him over, reversed, and parked on top of him. Damian watched as the boarding process began. He saw Preston wait until the very end, until Group 9 was called. Preston kept his head down, shuffling toward the gate agent with a printed paper boarding pass that was crumpled in his shaking hand. Damian felt a strange pull. He told himself to ignore it, to just board and enjoy his champagne. But he couldn't. He handed his bag to his assistant and walked quietly toward the economy boarding lane, standing just behind the podium where he could hear, but not be easily seen. The drama unfolded instantly. "Sir, the scanner is rejecting your pass," the young gate agent said, frowning at her screen. It must be a mistake." Preston's voice was a rasp, stripped of all its former booming arrogance. "I bought it yesterday. Third-party site, cheapflights.com. Please check again." "I see the ticket, Mr. van der Hoeven," the agent said. She paused. She recognized the name. Her eyes widened slightly, and she looked up at him. She remembered the training video. She remembered the face of the man who had abused her colleagues. Her demeanor cooled instantly. "Sir, this is a basic economy ticket. It does not include a carry-on bag. You have to check that roller. The fee is $75. Preston gripped the handle of his bag until his knuckles turned white. 75? It used to be 50. Summer peak pricing, she said flatly. Card only. No cash. Preston began to pat his pockets. He pulled out a wallet that was falling apart. He extracted a debit card and handed it over with a trembling hand. The agent swiped it. She waited. Beep, beep. Declined, she said, loud enough for the people behind him to hear. Try it again, Preston pleaded, sweat now streaming down his face. Please, I have to get to London. I have a court hearing tomorrow. If I miss it, I go to jail for debt evasion. Please. Sir, I can't let you board with the bag unless you pay, the agent said, her voice rising. And the card is declined. Step aside, please. You're holding up the line. No, you don't understand. Preston's voice cracked, rising into a hysterical pitch. I used to own this. I am Preston van der Hoven. You work for me. Well, you used to. Just let me on. It's one bag. The commotion drew attention. Passengers began to whisper. Phones came out. Oh my God, is that him? Someone whispered. That's the water guy. That's the racist guy. Look at him. He looks like a homeless person. The crowd mentality shifted. It wasn't pity, it was scorn. People love to see a titan fall, but they love to see him beg even more. Get off the plane, loser, a man from the back shouted. Karmazer, another woman laughed. Preston looked around, wild-eyed. He was trapped. 6 months ago, he had commanded this space. Now he was being jeered at by the very people he had called cattle. He looked at the agent, tears welling in his eyes. I'll leave the bag, Preston whispered, defeated. I'll throw it away. My clothes are in there, but I'll leave it. Just let me fly. It was a moment of total abasement. A man willing to throw away his only possessions just to escape his current reality. The agent hesitated. Sir, you can't leave unattended baggage in the terminal. That's a security risk. You either pay or you don't fly. Preston let out a sob. He dropped his head, letting go of the suitcase handle. He turned to walk away, his shoulders slumped in absolute ruin. Put it on my tab. The voice cut through the noise like a knife. It was calm, authoritative, and instantly recognizable. The gate agent froze. Preston froze. Damien Sterling stepped out from behind the podium. A hush fell over the gate area. The passengers parted like the Red Sea. Damien walked up to the counter. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at the agent. Mr. Sterling, the agent flustered. Sir, I was just following the new protocol for unpaid. You did your job perfectly, Jessica, Damien said gently, reading her name tag. You followed the rules, but I'm making an executive exception. He pulled out his personal black titanium card, the same one he had used to identify himself to the police 6 months ago. He tapped it on the reader. Beep. Approved. Damien picked up the baggage tag the machine spit out. He didn't hand it to the agent. He turned to Preston. Preston couldn't breathe. He looked at Damien, and for a second, he saw the ghost of his own mistakes staring back at him. He expected a lecture. He expected Damien to film him, to post it, to say, "Look at you now." Damien, Preston choked out. I don't have any way to pay you back. Damien looked at the man who had called him dirt. He looked at the torn suit, the grey skin, the eyes that had lost all light. He realized that hate hadn't just destroyed Preston's career, it had eaten his soul. Damien took a step closer, invading Preston's personal space, just as Preston had done to him. But instead of violence, Damien reached out and looped the luggage tag onto Preston's bag. "You don't owe me money, Preston," Damien said, his voice low and intense. "The debt you owe is to yourself. You spent 40 years thinking you were better than everyone else because of what was in your bank account. Now that the account is empty, you have to figure out who you actually are." Damien stood up straight and looked at the gate agent. "Jessica, is seat 34E still open?" "Yes, sir. Middle seat, last row." Damien nodded. He looked back at Preston. "I'm not upgrading you," Damien said firmly. "You're going to sit in 34E. You're going to sit in the middle. You're going to be uncomfortable. And for 7 hours, you're going to be surrounded by regular, working-class people. I suggest you talk to them. You might learn something." Preston stared at him, tears streaming down his face, dripping onto his dirty collar. "Why?" Preston whispered. "Why help me? I tried to ruin you." Damien adjusted his cuffs, his expression unreadable. "Because if I treated you the way you treated me, then I'm just you with a better suit. And I worked too hard to be Damien Sterling to ever stoop to being Preston van der Hoven." Damien turned his back on him. He didn't wait for a thank you. He walked toward the jet bridge, flashing his boarding pass. "Let's go, Jessica. We have a schedule to keep." Preston stood there for a long moment, clutching his bag. The passengers around him were silent now. The jeering had stopped. They had just witnessed something far more powerful than revenge. They had witnessed grace. Preston wiped his face. He picked up his bag. As he walked past the scanner, he didn't hold his head high, but he didn't look at the floor either. He looked at the back of Damien's head disappearing down the tunnel. He boarded the plane. He walked past the lie-flat beds of first class. He walked past the extra legroom of Economy Plus. He walked all the way to the back, to the very last row, next to the lavatories. He sat in seat 34E, between a young mother holding a crying baby and a construction worker reading a magazine. "Sorry," Preston murmured to the mother as he bumped her elbow. "Sorry." "It's okay," the woman smiled tiredly. "Long flight, right?" Preston looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in his life, he didn't see a statistic. He saw a person. "Yeah," Preston whispered, buckling his seatbelt. "It's been a very long flight, but I think I'm finally heading in the right direction." As the plane lifted off, banking over the glittering skyline of New York, Damien Sterling sat in 1A, drinking his water, reading his book. And 60 rows behind him, Preston van der Hoven closed his eyes, and for the first time in 6 months, fell into a sleep that wasn't haunted by his own ego. The plane climbed higher, leaving the heavy clouds behind, breaking through into the clear, endless blue. And that is the incredible, true-to-life saga of the flight that changed everything. Preston van der Hoven learned the hard way that a $3,000 suit doesn't cover up a cheap attitude. He lost his money, his status, and his family's respect, all because he couldn't treat a fellow human being with dignity. On the flip side, Damien Sterling showed us that true power isn't about how loud you yell, but how you stand your ground. He used his wealth not to punish Preston, but to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves, the crew. The ending is what really gets me, though. Even after everything, Damien paid for Preston's bag. He didn't do it for Preston. He did it to prove that he would never let someone else's hate change his own character. Now, I have a question for you guys. If you were Damien, and you saw Preston struggling in economy 6 months later, would you have helped him, or would you have let him suffer? I want to see your answers in the comments below. Let's get a debate going. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice, please do me a huge favor. Smash that like button, it really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for flying with us today. I'll see you in the next video.